And now it is my pleasure to introduce Ellen Burns-Johnson. She is an award-winning learning experience designer and strategist with over a decade of experience in L&D. She's also a game designer, podcaster, agile practitioner, and innovation evangelist. She believes in people and interactions over processes and tools, and also in harnessing the power of play for learning. As lead learning strategist at ELB, Ellen guides how team members across the company think about learning, organizational psychology, and technology. She and her team of learning strategists often work directly with customers in the early stages of partnerships and projects. Ellen, I think this is going to be super interesting. Please take it away.
I hope so. And hello to all my neighbors who are in Canada and Wisconsin. I'm calling in from Minnesota, where it is very melty right now. So let's go ahead and get started. Can I grab the screen share from you, Dee?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so Dee gave a wonderful introduction to this. But yeah, my name is Ellen Burns-Johnson. I do all the things that she listed. My formal title is VP of Learning Strategy. And basically what that means is I like to ask questions. And today we're going to be asking a lot of questions about multi-generational learning, what that landscape is, and what it actually means, because I think there's a lot of buzz around the term and what the implications are for our organizations. But I think the fundamentals are something we need to make sure we don't lose sight of. So we will be talking about boomers to zoomers and how we can all thrive together in today's workforce. Today, though, I want to learn a little bit more about you all. So I want to start with a quick poll, which is, what generation are you in? I want to know who's dialing in today, who's calling in, who's joining from their various locations. What generation are you from? Are you from the baby boomers, which is based on, different systems? You might get different years, but for today's purposes, we're going from 1946 to 1964. We've got our Gen Xers, 1965 to 1980. Our millennials, 1981 to 1996, and our Gen Z cohort from 1997 or 2020 or 2012. If you happen to be outside these normal four, tell us in the chat, because you are definitely an outlier, and I want to highlight your experience. Generation Oregon Trail, I like that. Yes. Can you be a cusper instead? Yes, you are. I am also a cusper by some measures. One of my favorite terms is Zennial, which is the cuspers between Gen Xers and millennials. You just spell it with an X. That's always a fun one. Okay. Let's give everyone a couple moments to answer the poll. So some of you are posting in chat, and that's fine. But also don't forget to answer the poll. There should be a pop-up in your screen asking you which poll number. All right, let's give everyone a couple more seconds. Last call for answers. What generation are you in? All right, let's see the results. Okay, lots of Gen Xers and a good chunk of millennials. Baby boomers, around 13% of respondents today, and some Gen Z are representing. Very nice. I'm not really surprised to see this split. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's move on to the next poll. So the next question I have for you is more about your workforce, right? So you've got your own perspective and your life experience. What about your workforce? Which generation makes up the majority of your workforce? And of course, you might not have the exact data about this, so just take your best guess. Based on the interactions you've had and the data you have seen for your organization, which generation makes up the majority of your workforce? Again, is it the boomers? Is it Gen X? Are millennials? Gen Z? And the year ranges, again, are on the slide behind the poll. So let's give everyone a few more seconds. Choose which generation you think makes up the majority of your workforce. And we'll give everyone 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's take a look at the results. Okay. All right. So pretty much everyone's saying that the belief is mostly millennials, along with some Gen X, a little more Gen Z, and 6% with the baby boomers on this particular poll. Very interesting. Okay. So we will look at some statistics in a little bit to look at how your organizations stack up to the averages. But that's good for me to know as we go through the rest of this presentation and talk about what does the implication mean when we look at that split. So today's workforce is more diverse than ever on many different counts. When it comes to generations, we've got 4 main generations in the workforce, but sometimes you get a little bit more from our Gen Alpha cohort. That's the generation after our Zoomers, our Generation Z. It's a multi-generational dynamic, which of course presents challenges, but also opportunities for organizations. With this diversity in age, we get a range of experience, a range of perspectives and skills. And it also, of course, brings in some challenges, right? There are gaps we have to bridge, whether they're in communication preferences and styles, technological fluency, or learning preferences. Our opportunity lies in leveraging this diversity, but we also then have to manage the challenges. So if we look at this as an opportunity primarily, then it can help us foster a more innovative, empathetic, and dynamic workplace. But the key is we have to understand kind of the trends and tendencies between generations, and also respect each person and each generation's contributions while finding common ground. So it's not just about smoothing over differences, it's about elevating our collective strengths. And also keeping in mind that these are broad generalizations. So we'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the rest of the session. In today's session, we're going to start with some high-level population trends. We're going to talk about some tendencies and general work habits by generation, and also when we should be thinking about those trends with some caveats and making sure that we don't overgeneralize. We'll talk about some biases, some myths, and we'll deconstruct some stereotypes into a way that maybe is a little bit more helpful for us. And then we'll talk about some strategies that L&D programs can adopt that will make programs more effective for multi-generational purposes, but they're just generally good practices because they account for individual differences. And so we'll dig into that a little bit more in today's session. Okay, let's start with our population trends. So I want to talk a little bit about what the population overall is. And when we looked at our webinar participants today, we had about 13% baby boomers, and then a little bit of a slice of Generation Z, and then mostly Gen X and millennials. In the population overall, what we're looking at is about 21%, 22% baby boomers, 19% Gen X, 22% Gen Y, that's millennials, and then about 20% Gen Z, that's our Zoomers. Other will include the silent generation, that's the generation before baby boomers, and I mentioned Gen Alpha earlier, that's the generation after our Zoomers. So the kids of the millennials are known as Gen Alpha. I have a couple nephews who are of that generation, and I adore them. Also, they're always asking me if I have games on my phone, and the answer is yes, but they can't play them. So this is what we're looking at. By 2028, so that's just 4 years from now, right? Generation X is projected to pass the baby boomers in population. Remember, each of these generations spans a few decades, so you get a pretty wide age range within each generation. And by 2030, millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha are expected to make up more than half the population. So as things go, this is just life. The population trends younger as we look forward in time. So what does that mean for the workforce, right? Mostly we're not getting Gen Alpha and the silent generation in the workforce. So we're going to be seeing some differences here. Let's take a look at the graph or the chart. So we're looking at US workforce averages. It's not as equally distributed as the general population, right? And that makes sense when you think about our primary working years. So I thought this was really interesting. The generational split for baby boomers in the US workforce overall was pretty similar to what we saw on the webinar today, about 14%. Gen X and Gen Y are, the bulk of the working population, Gen X at 33.8 and Gen Y at 39.1. As a generation overall, Gen Y is bigger than Gen X, so that also kind of reflects what we'd expect. And then we have more and more Gen Z joining the workforce all the time. And so we're seeing that slice of the pie grow. We can think about that, what that means over the next 10 years, right? So we talked about on the previous slide how the population is going to be changing overall. When it comes to the workforce, we're going to be looking at some significant transformations. Baby boomers are going to continue to retire. Congratulations. I hope you guys enjoy it. When we see that, we're going to be seeing a marked decline in their presence in the workplace. And that isn't just about numbers dwindling, it's also about a wealth of experience and knowledge that is transitioning out of daily work environments. We talk about technology and digital natives all the time when we're talking about generational differences, but ultimately work still comes down to interpersonal interactions. And our baby boomers have had decades and decades of experience doing that and working with people and helping people organize to get work done. That is knowledge and experience and all these amazing stories that are going to be transitioning out of the workplace. And we got to think about how to capture that experience before you guys get to go enjoy your time on the beach or whatever adventures you're going to have. So let's talk a little bit more about the generational trends and tendencies so we can think about how we are facilitating knowledge transfer both ways, from older generations to younger, and also vice versa. Let's start with the baby boomers. So that is a vinyl record, not a CD. I just want to call that out because I realized that as I picked that graphic, like, it kind of looks like a CD too. And I'm trying to pick some music technologies that were a little more iconic for each generation. That is a record, not a CD. So thinking about baby boomers, our baby boomers are experienced and knowledgeable, like I said. Typically, based on the data that's out there, baby boomers tend to value face-to-face conversation, and they're adapted to current digital communication tools, but still value phone calls and emails. I think one thing we want to call out here is that typically everyone appreciates recognition for their experience and knowledge, but it's called out as something that is specifically important or particularly important to the baby boomer generation. And I think that can sometimes be negatively stereotyped. And that is kind of a challenge, right? Because I think that, again, everyone appreciates recognition and knowledge or acknowledgement for their contributions. But one thing we also have to think about is that there are decades of experience and stories and knowledge behind these careers. And so when we're talking about appreciating recognition, it's just acknowledging the depth of that experience. One stereotype that can get tossed around is that boomers are resistant to change and new technologies, but I think that relates to the fact that if you spend many years investing in learning how something is done and really understanding processes, then any change represents kind of a thought process you have to go through, which is what's the sunk cost and what's the ROI. So I want to just kind of offer an alternative story to that stereotype, and then just kind of reframe that thinking. So data analysis, just backing up a little bit, I kind of hid this. This is something you guys will get a little bit, if you look at the deck, you'll see some of the sources at the bottom of the slides. So our generational sources are coming from a few different sources, Census Bureau data, and then analysis thereof, Brookings Institution and Pew Research. Yes, okay, thank you, Stephanie. The sources will be included in the slides we share after the webinar. Okay, and I do want to talk about that too, because I think that, again, these are broad generalizations and that can be tricky. So I'll come back to that particular point in a few slides. I do just want to go through these kind of larger generalizations and trends just to provide a backdrop to that deeper conversation. Gen X, typically the trends are that Gen Xers value adaptability, they value work-life balance, they typically are seen as independent or they prefer to work independently. They're seeking opportunities for skill development and career advancement, and they're more comfortable with formal and informal communication. Efficiency is important. I think a stereotype that gets tossed around a bit with Gen Xers is that they're cynical and disengaged. I shared this with my Gen X colleagues, and they were like, yeah, that's right. But I think if we're talking about, a group of people who broadly value independence and efficiency, then one of the things that you're also going to get when you offer or you ask for something is you're going to get the, what is it for me? So when it comes to training, people don't like to waste time, and you're going to see that expressed in Gen X in particular ways. But again, no one likes to waste time. So it's perhaps a generational stereotype, but it's also something that I think we can all relate to. Continuing with tendencies and trends, our millennials value collaboration in the workplace. They value flexibility and also work-life balance. That's nothing new. Seeking opportunities for growth, development, and making an impact is usually seen as something that's particularly important to Gen Y. Gen Gen Y, millennials prefer open, transparent, and frequent communication. I am a millennial myself. I'm sure I drive some of my colleagues crazy by how much I'm on Slack typing things, but they let me know if it's too much. The negative stereotype with millennials often tends to be around avocado toast. But when it comes to the workplace, we're seen as frequent job changers and not being loyal to employers. Now that's, again, it's a big stereotype. It's a broad generalization. To reframe that a little bit, again, if you're seeking meaning for your work and you're not finding it, then you're going to seek elsewhere. And so when we think about this as a stereotype, we can think about how we can make our workforce and our workplace a little bit more meaningful in the tasks that people are taking on. And that's one way to kind of flip the narrative there and say, okay, maybe it's not really about being a job hopper and disloyal. It's just people are seeking meaning in the work that they do. And that's a noble thing that we should encourage. I have kicked off a conversation about avocado toast in the chat. Share your opinions. There are no wrong opinions. I personally do like avocado toast, and I always add a little bit of paprika. Anyway, last but not least, we have our Generation Z, our Zoomers, the newest generation in the workforce and or in mass in the workforce, and they are expanding their presence all the time. So the stereotypes here: tech savvy, entrepreneurial. Gen V values diversity and inclusion. Again, seeking purpose-driven work and opportunities for skill building. One thing that is kind of marked as something to look for in Gen Z is that they prefer concise digital communication and value instant feedback. So there's a stereotype around Gen Z being frequent texters, and the responses are short. Okay, maybe that's true. Just keeping that in mind, some people prefer digital communication and their responses are going to be short. Doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to talk to you. It's just their preferred communication style. I think a negative stereotype, and this might be something we can all relate to, is that Gen Z is easily distracted and too dependent on technology. And the alternative story I want to offer for that is maybe they're simply younger and less experienced. They're working with what's comfortable for them, and they're trying to make sense of a very complex workforce and work environment. And so maybe instead of judging about people being too distracted, we can talk to them and coach. I think we can all remember our first years in the workforce and how we probably stepped on some toes and made some blunders. It's not really about forcing anyone's perspective on anyone else. It's just about learning each other's preferences and doing what we can to work towards those preferences. So if we have those conversations, we'll learn ways of doing things that work better, and we'll be able to share our knowledge and experience with others. And that is how learning happens. Okay, so I think I've mentioned this a few times over the last few minutes that these are broad tendencies and generalizations. They are not formulas, right? And they are not applicable to everyone in each generation, right? I think Ari just mentioned something in the chat that is a really good point. The idea about technological dependence for Gen Z is kind of interesting because Gen Z was still around for landline internet and VHS. Absolutely. So these are, again, broad generalizations. And I think while we can think about generations as a way to call attention to diversity in the workforce, it's not a formula, right? So I want to just call attention to the idea of, just call caution to the idea of formulaic approaches to generations by this idea of attention spans getting shorter. So this is kind of a trending topic. And whenever you see, clickbait pieces about generations, you'll often see the younger generations kind of getting dunked on for not having shorter attention spans. And then some research is brought up to talk about how it's actually true and we have shorter attention spans. So this is just something that gets a lot of buzz when someone needs to have an article that has a catchy headline. But there is some research around it. And that is interesting to me because I think the research is a good way of calling attention to the fact that even when research backs up certain things, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to do anything about it as L&D leaders. So Gloria Mark, she's a PhD at the University of California, Irvine, and she studies how technology affects our attention. So in 2004, she started measuring attention spans, initially using a stopwatch and then using some more automated tools. Basically, they would record how long people spent on tasks and screens at work. So they would be checking their email, they'd start the stopwatch, they switch their focus to something else, they stop the stopwatch for email, and they start the stopwatch for the other thing. Obviously, they were looking for ways to automate that, and they quickly found them, but they continued that research over time. So in 2004, the time on task that they found was about 2.5 minutes on average. And then in 2012, they found it to be about 75 seconds. Over the last 5 to 6 years, they've measured it at about 47 seconds. So between 2012 and today, that's about a 37% reduction. Those are big numbers if you look at them in percentages. And so you can create an article that says our attention spans are getting shorter by 37% over the last decade. Oh no. But that doesn't really take into consideration all the changes in the context of that work, right? So compared to 2012, we have probably, double the number, maybe 40% more apps that we're using at work, right? So we actually have different work streams that we're paying attention to. So the headlines don't necessarily take that into account. And the other thing I want to point out is that, okay, a reduction from 75 seconds to 47 seconds is 28 seconds. If we actually have a 28-second reduction in our attention span globally across the board, does that actually matter for our L&D programs? We weren't optimizing for 75-second attention spans in 2012. So do we really need to change what we're doing based on this kinds of research? And the answer is no, we've got to think more carefully about it. We can't really look at these huge, broad trends and take them as a formula for what we need to be doing in training. They are something that we can take in as an input, but we need to be looking at our programs, our learners, and how we need to apply this research and knowledge and these trends in the context of our individual programs. So when it comes to these generational trends, what I encourage everyone to do is think a little bit along the same lines as we just did with the attention span research. And that is, okay, what's forming the ideas you have about your learners? What is forming the basis of those ideas? Do you have data to back up your conclusions? Examine your beliefs and your experiences. If you don't have data, try to get it, especially if you have a larger workforce. You want to make sure that you're making those data-based decisions, because if your workforce is large, it's also complex, and that data will help you take a peek into that complexity. The main thing is one size never fits all. And I will acknowledge that sometimes all we have the resources to do is one size. And that's what we'll get into towards the rest of the presentation today is, okay, when we talk about efficiency, how can we build our programs efficiently using the right technologies and solutions to enable our programs to work for differences, not just in generations, but individually, right? Because I think that's ultimately what we want to accommodate. Okay. So for the rest of the presentation, we'll take the next 15 minutes or so to talk a little bit about these 4 strategies. These are kind of program level strategies that we can think about when it comes to building L&D programs, curricula, learning experiences that serve all of the 4 generations that we talked about. And in taking this approach, also serve all the individuals, because that's really what we're after, right? As much as we can, we want to personalize learning because we know that's going to serve engagement, it's going to serve motivation, and it's going to be just best for our workforce. So let's start with personalized learning. I mentioned one size does not fit all. Personalized learning approaches, they're really not a preference, they're a necessity because we have such a wide range of experience and expertise and ideas in the workplace. So whenever we can, we want to create learning paths that can support those individual career goals and learning preferences. I prefer the term learning preferences to learning styles, which is a whole different webinar for another day. But we still want to acknowledge those preferences when we can. When your preferences are met, you're going to be more motivated to engage with a learning experience. So by catering to those individual career goals and preferences, we try to make every learning journey as unique as the learner themselves. That can be different without technology, right? But it is a strategy that we want to try to keep in mind in today's modern workforce. Personalized learning, like I said, it increases engagement. It makes things more effective by aligning learning with the learner's own interests. That can be personalizing on-site workshops to online courses. It can be looking at different modalities. Can you deliver the same kind of content using different types of learning experiences? Can you create a podcast? Can you create a video? Can you create a game? Can you create something maybe more traditional? And then let people self-select the modality that's going to be working best for them at any given point in time. If you can take that approach, then you're going to increase the likelihood that every learner finds their fit, whether they're a baby boomer or a Gen Z. Yeah, learning style is an ancient term now, exactly. So in order to do that kind of personalization, typically you're going to need to look at some technology-enabled flexibility. So flexibility is crucial, like we just said, but it's also can be difficult, right? You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel 4 times every time you put some learning content out, right? You need to have some sort of technology that helps you scale that variability and keep track of what people are doing. So digital learning experiences are obviously a really important part of this. The on-the-go piece isn't really an option, I think, for many Gen Y and Gen Z learners now, but really everybody. They're kind of an expectation. It's an expectation to be able to engage with learning in different ways, in a way that fits your day, because we're really busy and we want to be able to make sure that we are balancing all of our priorities and keeping everything, keeping all the balls in the air at the right times. And the more flexible learning content can be, the more empowered we feel to achieve our own goals in all aspects of our lives. So it means we have to embrace tools and policies that really that enable every employee to learn in a way that suits their lifestyle and, again, their preferences and schedule. So learning experience platforms, rather than a more traditional LMS, LXPs can provide greater insight into learner behavior and performance, which gives you some of that rich data I mentioned earlier, that material that you want to look at so you can see if you're actually serving the needs of your diverse audience. LXPs often also include assessments to benchmark skills and ways to generate learning pathways so that people can follow their interests and have a cohesive experience that's pulling content from a lot of different topics that your organization finds important. Adaptive learning platforms, we'll get into this a little bit more with AI. We're going to talk about that in more detail later. But there are more adaptive learning platforms available right now. So that is technology that can analyze learner performance and behavior and then adjust content difficulty and type in real time. It's helpful if you can kind of map that with a skill inventory and competency mapping. These things, skill inventories and competency mapping, that's a big undertaking if you haven't done that in your organization, but it can be really valuable because it gives you a much better picture at what the kind of skills your organization needs to cultivate in the workforce in order to be successful, given the organization's offerings and goals and strategy and so on and so forth. So it's helpful to have those inventories and those maps available so that you can help create a roadmap for your training and really figure out whether your training is helping people do the right thing at the right time. And then content generation tools, right? So technology isn't just about getting the learning experience to the learner at the right moment. It's also about being able to create it faster. So if our learners expect us to present learning content in multiple different ways with multiple different modalities, we're going to be looking at any tools that can help us create those different modalities more efficiently and faster. And so, of course, AI is a way that we can do that. It's a little bit challenging sometimes to get that started. So we can talk about that next. Okay, so I am curious. I think we do have time for a poll here. I want to hear just kind of yes or no. Well, yes, very much so, a little bit, not yet, but soon. I have a poll for you guys, and I just want to hear from you all whether you have started to incorporate AI into your learning ecosystem, whether that's on the learner side of the equation or on the content development side of the equation. I'm curious where you are with your organization. It's obviously a huge topic. You can't turn on a device these days without seeing some coverage about AI. But I want to think specifically about AI in the learning space and whether you've been able to start incorporating it into the learning ecosystem. It's really interesting. What I hear from our customers, it just very much depends on the company and often the industry. Certainly industries that are more compliance driven are going to have a harder time adopting some of these tools. And I think larger organizations are also having, they run into a little bit more challenges. They have more structures in place that require longer review time for different technologies. And since there's still so much that's unknown in the AI space, that can kind of extend those review and approval periods. On the other hand, you have people who are reviewing and approving it. So that's a good thing. Okay. All right, this is interesting. So we have about 10% of you are saying that you have adopted AI into the learning ecosystem, either on the learner side or on the content development side. But it still seems like the bulk of people are kind of in the not yet, or yeah, it's going to be a while. We're still figuring things out. And I'm not really surprised to see that for the reasons that I just said. But I will say that it's only going to keep accelerating, right? So it's going to continue to get more complex. We have some things we can offer to help you. That's not what this talk is about, so we'll save that to the end. Okay, when it comes to artificial intelligence, I think we talk about a lot about what it can do, but I do want to kind of highlight the types of technology or AI-based technology that can be used in different areas in our learning ecosystems. So you might have heard of some of these terms. I want to talk about what they actually mean in terms of how they can be used in a learning ecosystem. So with machine learning, that's our machine learning algorithms. They can be used to analyze learner data and behavior. They are it's one of the technologies that can enable these personalized learning experiences, that adaptive training, predictive analytics. So we're teaching our machine learning algorithms to understand data and to extrapolate some trends and to interpret it for us in faster ways. That's machine learning. Natural language processing, that's what powers our chatbots, our automated language translation tools. Sometimes we can use it to automatically grade assignments or to improve accessibility and efficiency. If you're using ChatGPT to write a paper, you're working with some of this technology. But I think we can also be thinking about how we can use that to evaluate output, right? One of the things that I've always been frustrated about as an instructional designer is how everything can get boiled down to a multiple choice question. It doesn't have to be that anymore, right? If we have a well-calibrated AI agent, then maybe we can start exploring how people can use live responses and actually give us some rich information that includes their perspectives, and we can deliver coaching back to them at scale without necessarily needing to boil everything down to a multiple choice question. These are difficult things to do sometimes, but maybe not as difficult as you think. Recommender systems, we kind of touched on this a little bit before. When we're analyzing learner preferences using machine learning, we can be using that machine learning in a system that suggests relevant content, courses, and learning paths, which promotes that self-directed learning, reflects the learner's own interests, and increases motivation to engage with a given learning platform. Obviously, generative AI. We were all mentioning ChatGPT in the chat. That's kind of what we're looking for, and not just ChatGPT, but all, video and image related generative AI. And then, of course, adapting learning algorithms is kind of just a double click on what we were talking about earlier with recommender systems and machine learning. Now, Michelle said something that's really important. You got to be careful with garbage in, garbage out. So when I talked about creating an AI agent, what that means is you're taking an existing technology, and usually I hear the term agent specifically used in relation to something that's maybe generative AI, like the large language models, but you can train that specifically on a subset of data so that it develops a little bit more capability in a certain topic area, and then you can potentially use that as a coach. Now, of course, the challenge is that if you're not careful about what you've fed to the agent, then it's not going to give you it's not going to necessarily give you or your learners great advice or coaching or insight. And so you do have to, when you're thinking about building those systems, also think about how you're going to check it and make sure that even if people are learning from interactions with an AI agent, that they know that there's more to learn. That's not the end results. That's not the omega of their learning path. It's just one stop along the way. And that's a way that you can ensure that, or at least encourage people to seek out quality data, and to encourage them to be continuous learners as well. Last thing I want to highlight here is Oh, sound very poor. Is that my audio? My audio okay?
I think it's okay. It may be on Sylvie's end.
Okay. Yeah, Sylvie, I don't know if you can chat with, all right. Everyone say audio is okay. All right. Hopefully Sylvie can maybe chat in the back end and see if it gets better. Last thing I want to talk about is culture and continuous learning. So I think this is achieved in a few different ways. We want to move beyond formal training events to a more holistic model. And that's why I really like the term learning ecosystem. We want to include something for every niche, right? On the job learning, coaching, mentoring, social and collaborative learning, not just formal events. And this isn't a new concept, right? Like we've already heard the term 70-20-10, although we can dig into whether that model is accurate and useful, but the concept of there being different types of learning happening in different ways is not a new one. The thing is that it's now more of an expectation, right? So it's not that we expect to go to the training once a month and then figure it out on our own every other time. More and more, we expect there to be resources that are curated and cultivated by the organization, available to employees and learners across their entire workday. So if we can focus on that kind of learning ecosystem approach, then we're going to be creating a more agile, responsive, and innovative L&D organization, which will enable our organizations that we're serving to be more agile and responsive and innovative in turn. So I think that one thing I want to call out here is that this is a thing that really has to be set by leaders. You can have the systems in place, but if your culture doesn't support the use of those systems, then you're not going to get any value from them, right? So you can have all the great systems that allow people to go, and find good learning content and go and ask for help and go find examples and do some project-based learning. But if the organization doesn't value setting aside time to have those conversations or to do that exploration or to spend time on upskilling in that way, it won't do you any good. And so I think there's a lot of conversation right now, especially with the way that AI is changing the L&D landscape. A lot of conversation about how L&D organizations or departments can move to a more performance-oriented approach and have these value-based discussions with the organization, because that's where we should be. We should be talking about really, okay, what do our people need to learn? What do they need to be able to access in order to have that learning? And do they have the cultural support to be able to take advantage of those opportunities? If the leaders aren't backing up the language with actions, then it really won't go anywhere. And so there's always a change management component to L&D because of that very thing. Yeah, the learning is not billable hours. Yes, constant battle. Okay, so I want to summarize. We've got just about 5 minutes left to wrap up, and I want to answer a couple questions. So I'm just going to leave this up really quick. We talked about the workforce being very diverse, where we are presented with unique challenges, but also opportunities for engaging everybody. Each generation is loosely associated with certain values and work habits, but individual differences always trump generational tendencies. And so don't view those tendencies as formulas. Just use that as a way to kind of kickstart your thinking about how to accommodate all learners. Fostering a learning culture is essential. It doesn't matter what great technology you have. If it's not valued in the culture, it's not going to get you anywhere. But advanced learning technology is required to make this kind of thing happen at scale. And so if you've got the culture, or you're on the way to building it, then the way to realize the power of your diverse workforce is through the advanced technologies that enable collaboration and exploration in individualized ways at scale. Okay, so we have a few minutes for Q&A. Did we get anything in the Q&A panel, Dee?
Yes, we have a couple, and then we have some in the chat. These two are kind of related. It's Olivia would like to know if you have recommendations for ways to help managers and employees navigate differing expectations and work ethics between the different generations. And then Sylvie had asked, how do you capture the knowledge and experience of older generations? So I feel like those might be tied together.
Yeah, okay. I think I'd like to start with the second one. Obviously, mentoring programs are a really popular way of connecting people. I think it can be sometimes a difficult thing to sell. So one thing that I have recently learned about is the idea of reverse mentoring. So I'm not sure the best way to necessarily market this. It probably depends on your individual organization, but it's just a way of acknowledging that a mentoring relationship can go both ways, right? So you can get maybe more engagement across generations if you present these as like maybe learning partnerships, where we have an older person sharing their stories of working in this field for a long time, which can be a great way to share that knowledge down, but also a way for younger generations to share their perspectives up. And that can create some really interesting moments where things click, right? So that's where some really interesting insights can happen, where you have new ways of doing things along with this great experience. You might have a partnership that says, hey, we were talking back and forth and we thought of this different way. Can we try this out? And so that's a way for I think one interesting way to get that that knowledge and experience captured and do so in a way that's energizing and positive. The first part of that question I already forgot because I'm a millennial and I have the attention span of a goldfish. Can you remind me, Dee?
No, that's fine. And I think your answer to that question sort of also highlights just how important it is for all workers to make connections during their workday, especially as we all tend to be more remote.
Yes.
Just exchange that idea and information. Olivia had asked if you had recommendations for ways to help managers and employees navigate differing expectations and work ethics between the different generations.
Yes. Okay. That's right. So when I manage my team, which is mostly Gen X and a little bit of Gen Z, what we typically do is we have a very we use a lot of practices from agile development to kind of create standards for our team. So we have regular retrospectives where we examine how we do our work, and then we talk through what our preferences would be and offer suggestions about how we can change those practices. So on a regular, ideally a monthly basis, we are just examining how we work together as a team and bringing up problems and offering solutions and hopefully having some time to joke around a little bit so that we are having these candid conversations. And then we vote on what we like to do best. So everyone gets a voice, we talk through it a little bit, and then we vote on how we want to change things. And so that can be how many Slack channels we have, how often we post to them, whether you should use threads. Actually, that's not something that you can vote on because I insist that people use threads in Slack. But we talk about those things on a regular basis, just candidly and openly as a team. Now, we are remote. I would love to be able to do that at like a happy hour or a coffee hour on site, but we found a way to make it fun. We share some personal details at the beginning of every one of those meetings and just use it as a team bonding time, but also as a way to refine how we work together.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. Crystal would like to know, are there general L&D tools you recommend to implement for diverse learning ecosystems?
Yeah, so that is a tough one because it so much depends on your organization. I think the LXPs that we mentioned earlier are really where we need to be focused on because it's not just about delivering the content, it's about which content, right? And so you can feel free to email me. I have the strategy group's email up on the screen right now. We can continue that conversation. But I think that if you're really looking at working through that diverse population and how you're going to serve them, LXPs are one of the most important things that you should do. And the second one I would say would be figure out a way to use your existing communication tools to foster social learning. So no one wants too much information overload, but if there's a way to set it up so that there's an active dialogue about certain topics that people are passionate about, sometimes they'll be your best friend because they'll implement it on their own. You just need to make sure that you find a space, whether it's physical or virtual or both, where those conversations can take place.
Well, we have some other great questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. Stephanie has dropped links into the chat if you want to learn more. And Ellen, I hope you'll join us again to tell us more.
It was really great to be here today. Hit me up on email and I'll try to answer those remaining questions maybe in an upcoming blog post. Thank you all for joining today.
Thanks.
Go enjoy your avocado toast.